Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into the soot-stained, velvet-draped world of 19th century London to discover how the exhausted, overscheduled Victorian housewife practically engineered the modern afternoon nap out of sheer survival. Picture yourself rubbing your eyes open at 5 a.m. in a freezing townhouse, the bitter winter chill biting at your skin while you look at a towering mountain of domestic chores that would make a modern marathon runner faint. You probably won't survive this daily gauntlet of carrying boiling water up 3 flights of stairs, polishing heavy cast iron stoves with toxic black lead, and managing an army of temperamental servants, all while pretending to be a delicate, silent angel of the house. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening tonight, drop your current location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where in the world you are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge downstairs into the damp basement kitchen, your heavy wool skirts dragging on the cold stone floor. The mainstream historical reality of a Victorian housewife's morning is not one of leisurely sipping tea in parlor rooms. It is a relentless, exhausting marathon of physical orchestration. Even with a housemaid or cook at your disposal, the spiritual and mental burden of the household rests entirely on your heavily corseted shoulders. You are expected to inspect every inch of the larder, track every penny spent on mutton, and oversee the violent scrubbing of linens using harsh lye soap that eats away at the skin. By the time 11 a.m. rolls around, your lower back is screaming, your feet are throbbing inside tightly laced leather boots, and you are desperately seeking a loophole in the strict etiquette manuals of the era. This brings us to a rather quirky, fringe tidbit of 19th century domestic life. Housewives frequently used the excuse of checking the structural integrity of the parlor upholstery just to lay flat on their backs for 20 minutes without looking lazy to their husbands. If a neighbor walked in unexpectedly, you weren't sleeping. You were simply executing a highly scientific quality control inspection of the settee cushions. As you lean against the kitchen table, watching the coal dust filter through the pale morning sunlight, you realize that finding a moment of genuine rest in this era requires serious tactical planning. Historians still argue whether the extreme exhaustion experienced by these women was purely physical from the grueling labor, or if it was deeply psychological, driven by the suffocating societal pressure to maintain an absolutely flawless, pristine home at all times. Either way, as the clock chimes midday, your eyes grow heavy. The chaotic clatter of the kitchen fades into a dull murmur, and the absolute necessity of inventing a socially acceptable escape route becomes your primary mission for the afternoon. You slowly make your way up the narrow stairs toward the parlor, your breathing shallow and restricted. Every single step feels like a minor athletic achievement. And that is not just because you've been on your feet since dawn. No, your lack of oxygen is courtesy of the mainstream historical fact dominating every Victorian woman's wardrobe, the tightly laced whalebone corset. This marvel of 19th century engineering compresses your ribs, displaces your internal organs, and reduces your lung capacity by an astonishing 20 to 30%. It is practically a wearable cage, designed to ensure you look like an immobile porcelain doll, making any form of deep breathing an absolute luxury. As you finally cross the threshold into the dimly lit parlor, your eyes lock onto the ultimate sanctuary of the Victorian home, the fainting couch. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky, fringe tidbit of the era's design choices. The fainting couch wasn't just a random piece of furniture, it was specifically designed with a sloped, backless side to accommodate a woman's restrictive clothing. Standard chairs forced you to sit perfectly upright, which, when you couldn't take a full breath, frequently resulted in sudden blackouts. The fainting couch allowed you to gracefully collapse horizontally without wrinkling your heavy silk skirts or violating the strict rules of decorum. If anyone asked, you weren't slacking off or taking a common nap. You were merely dealing with a temporary bout of the vapors or a sudden physical delicacy brought on by the atmospheric pressures of London. It was the perfect, socially approved cover story for a midday snooze. You sink onto the plush velvet cushions, letting your head rest against the carved wooden bolster. Historians still argue whether the entire phenomenon of Victorian fainting and the subsequent rise of the fainting couch was a genuine medical consequence of tight lacing, or if women subtly amplified these swooning episodes as a form of silent psychological protest to carve out mandatory periods of rest in a world that demanded constant productivity. Regardless of the underlying academic debate, as you recline on the velvet, the intense pressure on your diaphragm finally eases up. You can feel your heartbeat slowing down as you close your eyes, letting the distant, rhythmic clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the cobblestones outside lull you into a state of hazy, much-needed relaxation, far away from the rigid expectations of the household. You detach yourself from the parlor's fainting couch and quietly head upstairs to your private bedroom, seeking a deeper, more secluded sanctuary for your afternoon rest. As you close the heavy mahogany door behind you, you are enveloped by the muted, elegant aesthetics of a proper 19th century middle-class bedchamber. The mainstream historical fact of this space is its design as a total sensory escape from the industrial pollution outside. Thick lace curtains filter the gray London smog, heavy rugs muffle the sounds of the street, and the walls are covered in the era's most fashionable, vibrant, green-patterned wallpaper. However, this brings us to a terrifyingly quirky, fringe tidbit of Victorian domestic life. Your beautiful, relaxing bedroom is almost certainly trying to kill you. That stunning, brilliant emerald hue on your walls, popularly known as Paris green or Cy-Eels green, is made using massive amounts of copper arsenite. As you lay down to rest, the damp English air reacts with the wallpaper paste, causing microscopic, toxic arsenic dust and fungus-driven gases to flake off and float gently through the room. While you are peacefully closing your eyes to rejuvenate your mind, you are literally breathing in low-level poison, which explained why so many Victorian women woke up from their naps feeling mysteriously sluggish, nauseous, and plagued by headaches. You rest your head against the cool linen pillows, letting your gaze wander over the intricate, toxic floral patterns surrounding you. Historians still argue whether Victorian manufacturers were entirely aware of the lethal dangers of these arsenic-laced pigments and actively covered it up for profit, or if the public's obsession with vibrant home decor simply outpaced the primitive chemical safety standards of the medical establishment. Either way, the irony is thick enough to choke on. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in ancient history? At least that wasn't lining the walls of your peaceful sanctuary. You pull a soft knitted quilt up to your shoulders, deliberately ignoring the faint, sweet garlic scent of the arsenic gas in the air, and let your heavy eyelids close as you drift into a deep, hazardous slumber. You shift slightly on your mattress, your mind floating in that strange, hazy borderline between deep sleep and wakefulness. If the toxic emerald wallpaper isn't enough to keep you under, you might find yourself relying on the mainstream historical fact of 19th century medicine, the absolute ubiquity of over-the-counter opiates. In the Victorian era, you didn't need a doctor's prescription or a complex medical diagnosis to access heavy-duty sedatives. You simply walked down to the local corner chemist and purchased a bottle of patent medicine right alongside your flour and sugar. This brings us to a highly quirky, fringe tidbit regarding the era's ultimate relaxation aid: laudanum. This potent mixture of opium and alcohol was marketed as a literal cure-all for practically every female ailment imaginable, from minor menstrual cramps to the vague everyday stress of managing a household. Housewives frequently kept a discreet vial of this amber liquid tucked away in their vanity drawers, occasionally adding a few drops to their afternoon tea or standard tonic water. It wasn't seen as a dangerous narcotic addiction. It was viewed as a perfectly sensible domestic tool to calm the nerves and guarantee a peaceful, undisturbed hour of afternoon rest. You take a slow, shallow breath, feeling the heavy, synthetic calm of the era's primitive pharmacy weighing down your limbs. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of laudanum among middle-class women was a genuine attempt by 19th century doctors to treat misunderstood psychological conditions like anxiety and depression, or if it was a deliberate, systemic method used by a patriarchal society to chemically sedate understimulated, frustrated housewives who grew tired of their highly restricted lives. Think of it as the 19th century precursor to those modern, questionable wellness trends, though at least our current sleep remedies don't come with a high risk of accidental pirate-level addiction. As the grandfather clock in the hallway ticks away the minutes, the lingering chemical fog ensures that your muscles stay completely loose, anchoring you safely to your bed while the busy Victorian world continues its loud, frantic rush outside your door. You shift slightly on your mattress, your mind floating in that strange, hazy borderline between deep sleep and wakefulness. If the toxic emerald wallpaper isn't enough to keep you under, you might find yourself relying on the mainstream historical fact of 19th century medicine, the absolute ubiquity of over-the-counter opiates. In the Victorian era, you didn't need a doctor's prescription or a complex medical diagnosis to access heavy-duty sedatives. You simply walked down to the local corner chemist and purchased a bottle of patent medicine right alongside your flour and sugar. This brings us to a highly quirky, fringe tidbit regarding the era's ultimate relaxation aid: laudanum. This potent mixture of opium and alcohol was marketed as a literal cure-all for practically every female ailment imaginable, from minor menstrual cramps to the vague everyday stress of managing a household. Housewives frequently kept a discreet vial of this amber liquid tucked away in their vanity drawers, occasionally adding a few drops to their afternoon tea or standard tonic water. It wasn't seen as a dangerous narcotic addiction. It was viewed as a perfectly sensible domestic tool to calm the nerves and guarantee a peaceful, undisturbed hour of afternoon rest. You take a slow, shallow breath, feeling the heavy, synthetic calm of the era's primitive pharmacy weighing down your limbs. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of laudanum among middle-class women was a genuine attempt by 19th century doctors to treat misunderstood psychological conditions like anxiety and depression, or if it was a deliberate, systemic method used by a patriarchal society to chemically sedate understimulated, frustrated housewives who grew tired of their highly restricted lives. Think of it as the 19th century precursor to those modern, questionable wellness trends, though at least our current sleep remedies don't come with a high risk of accidental pirate-level addiction. As the grandfather clock in the hallway ticks away the minutes, the lingering chemical fog ensures that your muscles stay completely loose, anchoring you safely to your bed while the busy Victorian world continues its loud, frantic rush outside your door. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back roughly 4,500 years into the blinding, dusty heat of the old kingdom of Egypt, where you are not a majestic pharaoh or a wealthy high priest, but a thoroughly exhausted baker with flour in your eyelashes and sand in places we won't mention. You are standing in a mud brick kitchen near the Giza Plateau, sweating profusely as the desert wind blows another fine layer of grit into your mixing trough, and honestly, you probably won't survive this shift if the head overseer catches you slacking off again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you are settling in, go ahead and drop a comment below with your current location and your local time. It is always deeply fascinating to see where in the world you are trying to fall asleep right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge over to the heavy limestone mortar, your sandals slipping slightly on the smooth, packed earth floor. Your arms ache from hours of crushing emmer wheat, an ancient grain that resists hulling with a stubbornness that feels almost personal. Mainstream Egyptologists tell us that emmer was the absolute backbone of the Nile diet, requiring intense physical labor just to separate the chaff from the grain. You lift the heavy wooden pestle once more, letting it fall with a rhythmic, hypnotic thud. Thump, thump, thump. It is an exhausting process, and frankly, your back feels like it was built out of poorly stacked mud bricks. To make matters worse, You are pretty sure the local grain distributor shorted you on the latest shipment, mixing in extra desert gravel to pad the weight. Some fringe researchers even suggest that ancient bakers purposefully left a high percentage of fine sand in the flour to act as a crude dietary abrasive, though most sensible people realize it was just impossible to keep the desert out of the food. As you work, you look out the narrow slit of a window toward the horizon where the Great Pyramids are currently being built. They look less like majestic monuments and more like a massive, never-ending construction project that is keeping the entire city covered in a perpetual haze of limestone dust. You pour the coarsely ground emmer into a wide, shallow earthenware basin, wiping a bead of sweat from your forehead with the back of a flour-dusted forearm. It is late afternoon, and the air inside the bakery is thick, heavy, and smells faintly of damp clay and stale beer. You add water from a heavy Nile silt jar, stirring the slurry with your bare hands. The mixture is thick, sticky, and frustratingly uncooperative. Historically, your people have always baked flat, dense cakes of bread, slapping the unleavened paste directly onto hot stones or inside heavy clay molds. It is a predictable routine. You mix, you shape, you bake, and you break your teeth on the resulting hard tack. Historians still argue whether the invention of raised bread was a deliberate, calculated experiment by royal chefs, or just a spectacular cosmic fluke born from pure laziness. Looking at your current situation, you are heavily leaning toward the laziness theory. You are supposed to form this paste into neat, flat discs for the evening ration, but the heat is oppressive, your feet are throbbing, and a passing sacred scarab beetle has caught your attention, crawling sluggishly across the threshold. You decide to sit down for just a brief moment against the cool, shaded wall of the bakery, leaving the wet, uncovered dough sitting exposed to the warm, heavy desert air. Your eyelids grow heavy. The rhythmic sound of a distant river barge lulls your senses, and before you know it, you have drifted off into a deep, unauthorized nap, completely unaware that invisible microscopic invaders are currently parachuting into your dinner. You wake up with a start, a thin line of drool drying on your cheek, and the distinct sensation that you have slept way past your shift. The harsh, blinding glare of the afternoon sun has softened into a deep, amber twilight, casting long, dramatic shadows across the mud brick walls of the bakery. Panic hits you like a splash of cold Nile water. If the overseer finds out you fell asleep on the job, you might find yourself demoted to carrying heavy limestone blocks up a ramp, or worse, forced to wear that awful crocodile dung sunscreen the local herbalists swear by. You scramble to your feet, your joints popping in the quiet air, and rush over to the earthenware basin where you left your wet emmer paste. When you look inside, you don't see the flat, smooth puddle of dough you left behind. Instead, the mixture has undergone a bizarre, slightly alarming transformation. It has expanded, swelling up toward the lip of the bowl like a slow-motion mudslide. Its surface is no longer smooth. It is covered in hundreds of tiny, popping bubbles, and it gives off a sharp, tangy, slightly fruity aroma that smells suspiciously like the floor of a tavern after a particularly wild festival. Mainstream history confirms that ancient Egyptians were masters of fermentation, simultaneously brewing thick, porridge like beer alongside their baking operations, meaning the air in your kitchen was absolutely swimming with wild yeasts and lactobacilli. You poke the dough tentatively with one finger. It deflates slightly with a soft, wet sigh, releasing an even stronger wave of that sour fragrance. You have no idea what has actually happened here. To your ancient mind, invisible spirits, or perhaps a wandering, benevolent deity, has touched your mixing bowl. In reality, you have just witnessed the world's first accidental sourdough starter. Some fringe theorists like to claim that these specific strains of wild yeast didn't originate in the Nile Valley at all, but were actually introduced by extraterrestrial travelers who wanted to improve the cosmic quality of human carbohydrates, which is honestly a hilarious image to picture while you are standing there covered in flour. You realize you have a massive dilemma on your hands. You don't have enough fresh emmer grain left to throw this bubbly mess away and start over, and the evening ration deadline is approaching fast. Historians still argue whether ancient bakers recognized the bubbling as a sign of spoilage, or if they immediately understood its potential to create a lighter, fluffier texture. As you stand there staring at the fermenting goop, you decide that survival trumps culinary perfection. If you serve this weird, bloated dough to the workers, they might just think it's a new recipe from the capital. You roll up your sleeves, take a deep breath, and plunge your hands back into the sticky, carbonated mass, feeling the strange, spongy texture give way under your fingers as you prepare to risk your entire baking career on a batch of rotten dough. You nervously divide the bubbly, sour-smelling dough into portions, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped sparrow. The kitchen is growing dark, illuminated only by the flickering orange glow of your hearth fire. Normally, you would just slap these dough balls onto a flat, hot stone, but tonight, the texture is so loose and airy that you have to handle it with extreme care, lest it slip right through your fingers like mud. You lift the first piece, noting how oddly light it feels compared to the dense, leaden lumps you usually produce. Mainstream archaeological excavations at Amarna and Giza have uncovered specialized royal bakeries with elaborate conical ovens, proving that the Egyptians eventually refined this process into an absolute science. But right now, you are flying completely blind in a smoky room. You carefully slide the fermented dough into the heated clay molds, holding your breath as the heat hits the mixture. Almost instantly, a smell begins to fill the room that makes your stomach rumble. It isn't the usual flat, slightly burnt aroma of unleavened starch. It is a deep, rich, deeply complex fragrance, toasty, sharp, and undeniably mouth-watering. You watch in absolute fascination through the shimmering heat waves as the dough doesn't just bake, but actively rises, puffing up over the rims of the earthenware pots like a golden, crusty crown. It is a minor miracle. Some fringe historical circles love to speculate that the specific tang of this early sourdough was used by high priests as a mild hallucinogenic substance during secret temple rituals, though it's far more likely that the priests just really, really enjoyed having a sandwich that didn't break their teeth. You pull the first loaf out of the heat using two flat pieces of wood, setting it down on the stone counter with a hollow thunk. The crust is beautifully blistered, sporting a deep amber hue that looks vastly superior to the pale gray bricks you usually serve. Historians still argue whether the very first consumers of this leavened bread were terrified of being poisoned by the sour taste, or if they immediately celebrated it as a culinary breakthrough. You break off a small piece from the edge, blowing on it frantically to cool it down before popping it into your mouth. The texture is a revelation. Instead of a dense, chewy mass that requires 10 minutes of intense mastication, your teeth sink into a soft, airy crumb filled with beautiful, irregular pockets of air. The flavor has a delightful, sharp kick that cuts right through the natural sweetness of the emmer grain. You realize you haven't just avoided a whipping from the overseer. You have accidentally stumbled upon a texture that is going to make you the most popular baker in the entire district, provided you can actually figure out how to do it again tomorrow. Now that you have realized this accidental creation is a triumph, you have to shift your focus to production, which means mastering the brutal, sweltering choreography of the ancient Egyptian hearth. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about earlier? Well, standing in front of a row of blazing conical ovens, you might actually start considering it just to protect your face from the blistering radiant heat. Mainstream archaeological surveys have revealed that Old Kingdom bakeries operated on a massive, almost industrial scale, utilizing heavy, thick-walled clay pots called bedja to ensure even heat distribution. You grab a pair of thick, coarse linen rags to protect your hands, lifting one of these massive bedja vessels from the ash pit. The process is physically grueling. You have to preheat these heavy clay cones directly in the embers until they are radiating heat like small volcanoes, then flip them over, pour the wet, fermented emmer dough inside, and cover them back up with hot coals. The air in the bakery is now so thick with smoke and wood ash that you can barely see your own reflection in the water jars. Every breath carries the scent of burning acacia wood, caramelized grain, and your own singing arm hairs. You move down the row of ovens with a rhythmic, hypnotic momentum, your body operating on pure muscle memory as the heat bakes the sweat onto your skin into a salty crust. Some fringe, alternative theories suggest that the precise conical geometry of these bedja pots was designed to align with the cosmic energy of the Great Pyramid, channeling celestial frequencies to perfectly activate the dough. But you know the truth is much simpler. The heavy clay is just excellent at trapping steam, which allows the wild yeast to expand fully before the crust sets. As you work, you notice that the dough from the previous day's leftover batch, the sticky, sour residue clinging to the sides of your wooden mixing trough, seems to act as an accelerant. When you mix fresh water and flour into that unwashed bowl, the new batch bubbles up twice as fast. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian bakers consciously maintained a continuous mother dough starter for years at a time, or if they simply relied on the residual wild bacteria living permanently in the porous wood of their utensils. To you, it just looks like a beautiful shortcut. You don't have to wait half a day for the invisible spirits to visit your bowls anymore. The magic is already living inside the wood, waiting to wake up the moment it tastes fresh water. You slide the last clay lid into place over the embers, leaning against a smooth basalt pillar to catch your breath. Your muscles are screaming, your lungs are full of ash, but as you listen to the gentle, rhythmic crackle of the cooling coals, you can't help but smile at the rows of perfect, golden, high-rising loaves cooling on the woven palm mats behind you. You stand in the quiet, cooling bakery, watching the last sliver of the moon dip below the Giza horizon, casting a soft, silvery glow across your rows of freshly baked, aromatic loaves. It is hard to comprehend, as you brush the remaining flour from your calloused hands, that this accidental discovery of sour, bubbling dough is destined to ripple across thousands of years of human civilization. Mainstream food historians widely credit these early Egyptian methods as the foundational birthplace of organized baking, a crucial technological leap that transformed bread from a mere dense survival ration into an absolute culinary art form that would eventually feed the Roman Empire, sustain medieval Europe, and spark a global baking renaissance in the modern world. As you look down at your trusty, unwashed wooden mixing trough, now coated in a thick, dried crust of active culture, you are looking at the literal ancestor of every sourdough starter currently bubbling away on 21st century kitchen counters. Some fringe historical theorists love to claim that these ancient, resilient strains of Nile Valley yeast possess a unique, mystical genetic longevity, prompting modern enthusiasts to attempt to resurrect microscopic organisms scraped directly off ancient museum pottery shards. Though standard biology tells us that wild yeast is happily ubiquitous, living right now on the skins of modern fruits and floating through the very air of our own kitchens. As you prepare to finally head home for some well-deserved rest, you take one last look at your creations. Historians still argue whether the transition from wild, spontaneous sourdough fermentation to predictable, isolated brewer's yeast in the 19th century was a grand victory for industrial efficiency or a tragic loss for traditional flavor complexity. For you, sitting in the twilight of the Old Kingdom, there is no debate. The sharp, tangy aroma lingering in your hair is the smell of pure success, a beautiful mistake born from a simple nap under the desert sun that somehow unlocked the hidden, microscopic secrets of nature. The long, chaotic day in the ancient bakery is finally over, and the intense heat of the hearth is gently fading into the cool, still air of the desert night. The heavy stone mortars sit silent now, the wooden pestles rest against the mud brick walls, and the crackling embers have softened into a dim, comforting bed of gray ash. You can let go of the heavy clay pots, leave the flour-dusted counters behind, and allow your tired muscles to completely relax. The gentle, rhythmic sigh of the Nile breeze whispers through the narrow windows, carrying away the last traces of smoke and carrying in the deep, peaceful quiet of the ancient valley. There are no more overseers to please, no more grain to grind, and no more fires to tend. The world around you is sinking into a deep, velvety darkness, resting beneath a vast canopy of timeless stars that have watched over bakers, dreamers, and weary travelers for thousands of years. Your breathing slows, matching the steady, peaceful rhythm of the sleeping river as you let yourself drift away into the soft, warm shadows of a well-earned rest. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back to the height of the Aztec Empire, where the air is thick with the scent of damp moss, blooming marigolds, and the rich, earthy tang of shallow lake water. You are not a fierce jaguar warrior or a high priest standing atop a towering stone pyramid. Instead, you are a remarkably mellow farmer clad in a simple woven cactus fiber cloak, balancing carefully in a narrow wooden dugout canoe. You are gliding through the glassy canals of Lake Texcoco just before dawn, watching the mist rise off the water, and honestly, you probably won't survive this shift if you lose your balance and drop your favorite wooden digging stick into the bottomless lake sludge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you are settling in, go ahead and drop a comment below with your current location and your local time. It is always deeply fascinating to see where in the world you are trying to fall asleep right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You dip your wooden paddle into the calm, dark water, the gentle ripple making a soft swish against the reeds. Mainstream historical consensus confirms that Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, was a sprawling metropolis built entirely on an island, relying heavily on an ingenious system of raised agricultural beds called chinampas to feed its population. You steer your canoe alongside one of these rectangular plots, which looks like a long, green ribbon floating effortlessly on the lake's surface. Your feet are slightly damp from the condensation pooling at the bottom of your canoe, and your shoulders carry the pleasant, dull ache of someone whose daily commute involves paddling instead of sitting in traffic. To keep the edges of your narrow island secure, you have planted native ahuejote water willows all along the perimeter. Their roots form an incredibly dense, underground web that anchors the soil directly to the lake bed. Some fringe, alternative theorists like to claim these willow grids were arranged in precise geometric patterns to act as an ancient, biological network for broadcasting acoustic energy across the valley, though most sensible people realize they were just an exceptionally brilliant way to stop your backyard from washing away during a heavy storm. You watch a small waterfowl duck into the reeds nearby, its rhythmic splashing acting as a natural metronome for your morning. Historians still argue whether the earliest chinampas were born out of desperate necessity due to severe land shortages or if they were the result of a highly organized, state-mandated engineering project designed by royal architects. As you tie your canoe to a thick willow trunk, you suspect it was a bit of both. You step onto the damp, spongy earth of your plot, feeling the ground give just a tiny fraction under your weight. It feels remarkably secure, a testament to the layers of reeds and mud beneath your toes. You look out over the vast expanse of the lake, where hundreds of similar green islands stretch out into the morning fog, creating a quiet, floating labyrinth that feels entirely separated from the bustling stone markets of the city center. You look down at the edge of your floating plot, where a small section of the woven reed fencing has begun to sag from the constant lapping of the lake's gentle waves. Remember that stubborn emmer grain we talked about in ancient Egypt that required total back-breaking labor? Well, maintaining a chinampa is a completely different kind of work. It is a slow, meditative, almost hypnotic routine of weaving and scooping. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows that these plots were constructed by first weaving massive, heavy mats of reeds and wild cane, anchoring them to the lake bed with long wooden stakes, and then layering them with alternating coats of thick lake mud and decomposing aquatic vegetation. You kneel down on the damp earth, your hands moving with practiced ease as you weave fresh, supple reeds into the existing boundary fence. The air is cool, and the morning mist is just beginning to burn off, revealing the faint silhouette of the great twin pyramids of Tenochtitlan in the distance. To your left, a small green frog watches you from a lily pad, blinking slowly in the dim light. Some fringe historians like to speculate that the specific weaving patterns used in the reed walls were actually a hidden form of binary code used to keep records of cosmic calendar cycles, though in reality, you are just trying to make sure your prized maize plants don't slide into the water. Once the reed wall is secure, you grab your Zakwi Madel, a specialized wooden scoop with a long handle designed specifically for dredging the canal floor. You lean over the side of the plot, plunge the scoop deep into the dark water, and pull up a heavy, glistening mound of rich black lake mud. It makes a satisfying, wet plop as you deposit it onto the surface of the bed. This mud is incredibly fertile, packed with centuries of decayed organic matter and nutrients that ensure your crops never run out of food. Historians still argue whether individual families entirely owned these floating strips of land or if they were strictly managed under a communal tribute system overseen by the local Kalpuli neighborhood authorities. For you, the legal technicalities matter far less than the rhythmic repetition of the work. Scoop, lift, deposit. Scoop, lift, deposit. The water ripples outward in perfect concentric circles each time the wooden blade enters the lake, and the cool mud oozes between your fingers as you smooth it over the roots of your plants. It is a peaceful, isolated world out here on the water, where the only sound is the rustle of the wind through the willow leaves and the soft, repetitive splash of your scoop rhythmically feeding the island. You stand up and stretch your back, looking over the freshly mudded surface of your floating garden bed. The sun is higher now, warming the damp earth and releasing a rich, swampy perfume that tells you your crops are exceptionally well fed. But maintaining this incredible level of fertility requires an ingredient that might make modern gardeners hold their noses. Mainstream historical documentation confirms that the Aztecs maintained an incredibly sophisticated urban sanitation system where human waste was carefully collected from public latrines throughout the city, transported via specialized barges, and sold to farmers to be used as a highly potent fertilizer. Remember that bizarre crocodile dung sunscreen from our journey along the Nile? Compared to the sheer scale of the Aztec municipal fertilizer economy, a little reptile cream seems almost quaint. You walk down the narrow path of your plot, carrying a lightweight wicker basket filled with dried, treated organic material to top off your seed beds. The Aztecs were absolute masters of companion planting, grouping maize, beans, and squash together in a symbiotic trio known as the Three Sisters. The tall maize stalks provide a natural trellis for the climbing beans, while the wide, prickly leaves of the squash shade the soil, keeping it moist and preventing weeds from taking root. Some fringe, alternative botanical circles, like to suggest that these plant combinations were engineered using ancient genetic manipulation techniques granted by forest spirits, though anyone who has ever watched a bean vine naturally curl around a stalk knows it is just a beautiful display of nature's simple geometry. You gently pat a handful of the nutrient-rich mixture around the base of a young squash plant, admiring its vibrant yellow blossom. The water table here is so high that your plants never suffer from drought. The porous underlayer of the chinampa acts like a giant, self-watering sponge, drawing moisture upward through the soil directly to the roots. Historians still argue whether this intense year-round agricultural cycle eventually caused heavy soil exhaustion that required complex crop rotation, or if the constant addition of fresh canal mud made the system completely self-sustaining for centuries. As you look at the deep green of your leaves, you lean toward the self-sustaining side of the debate. The system feels perfectly balanced, a gentle loop where everything taken from the lake is eventually returned to it, keeping the entire valley fed without ever wearing out the earth beneath your feet. You carefully lift a heavy woven basket filled with your morning harvest, the bright red skins of heirloom tomatoes and the deep green of fresh chili peppers glistening under a layer of morning dew. Now that your plots are tended, it is time to navigate the bustling, watery highways of the empire to bring your goods to market. Remember that heavy, smoke-filled baker's hearth we visited in ancient Egypt, where your arm hairs were constantly on the line? Out here on Lake Texcoco, the dangers are much more subtle, mostly involving the stealthy native wildlife that considers your floating garden to be a premium, all-you-can-eat buffet. You keep a watchful eye on the thick willow roots, knowing that a hungry ocelot or a sneaky marsh opossum might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for you to drop your guard. Mainstream archaeological research reveals that Tenochtitlan relied on a massive fleet of thousands of daily canoes to transport tons of fresh produce from the southern Chinampa districts directly to the grand market of Tlatelolco. You step back into your dugout canoe, carefully balancing the heavy baskets along the center line to keep the narrow craft from tipping into the dark, silt-heavy water. With a gentle push of your paddle against the willow-lined bank, you slide into the main canal artery. The water is a highway of gentle traffic, filled with fellow farmers paddling silently through the mist, their canoes piled high with white maize, orange marigolds, and sweet potatoes. Some fringe, alternative historians love to claim that the entire canal network of the Aztec capital was mapped out to perfectly mirror the constellations of the night sky, acting as a giant aquatic star chart that allowed farmers to navigate by cosmic alignment even in thick fog, though in reality, the canals simply followed the natural topography of the lake basin. As you paddle along, you have to duck your head slightly as you pass under a low, arched wooden footbridge connecting two residential islands. The city is just waking up, and the soft, rhythmic sound of women grinding corn on stone imitates echoes from the open courtyards of the passing mud brick houses. Historians still argue whether the Aztec state strictly regulated the canoe traffic through a complex system of water tolls and aquatic traffic wardens, or if the flow of boats was entirely self-governing based on mutual respect among the farmers. For you, the journey is incredibly peaceful, a slow and rhythmic glide through a city built on water where the splashing of paddles and the distant call of market birds create a gentle, comforting melody that carries you effortlessly toward the heart of the empire. You turn your canoe around as the brilliant orange and violet hues of the evening sky begin to reflect off the perfectly still surface of Lake Texcoco. The bustling energy of the Tlatelolco market is far behind you now, and your dugout craft is wonderfully light, its heavy baskets emptied of produce and replaced by a small bundle of trade goods for your household. Mainstream historians widely recognize the Chinampa system as one of the most sophisticated and sustainable forms of intensive agriculture ever created by human ingenuity, a triumph of ecological engineering that allowed a massive civilization to thrive inside a delicate lake basin without destroying its own environment. As you glide back into the narrow canals of your home district, you look at the enduring green bands of earth resting on the water. Some fringe historical theorists like to suggest that these floating gardens possess an ancient, mystical resilience capable of filtering heavy metals and purifying the surrounding valley through secret botanical alchemy. Though modern environmental science confirms that the complex root structures of the Ahuejote willows and the deep layers of organic sediment simply form a highly efficient, natural biofiltration system that keeps the water oxygenated and healthy. Remarkably, even in the 21st century, remnants of these ancient floating gardens still survive in places like Xochimilco, where modern farmers use the exact same methods you practice today to cultivate flowers and vegetables amidst the echoes of a lost empire. Historians still argue whether the arrival of Spanish colonial engineering, which systematically drained the Great Lakes of the Valley of Mexico, was an inevitable tragedy of urban expansion or a catastrophic miscalculation that ruined a perfect hydrological paradise. For you, sitting quietly in your canoe as the night rolls in, the grand debates of history matter very little. The cool evening breeze rustles through the willow leaves. The gentle lap of the water against your hull creates a soothing, repetitive cadence, and the knowledge that your floating island will sit safely in the dark, self-watering, and resting for tomorrow's sunrise brings a profound sense of peace to the end of your long journey. The long, tranquil day on the floating gardens of the valley is finally drawing to a close, and the vibrant colors of the Aztec sky are gently fading into the deep, quiet dark of the lakeside night. The busy canals sit silent now. The wooden paddles are laid to rest at the bottom of the canoes, and the grand stone pyramids in the distance have softened into dim, comforting shadows beneath the stars. You can let go of the long, dredging scoops, leave the damp earth of the paths behind, and allow your tired body to completely unwind. The cool, soft mist of Lake Texcoco rises gently from the water, wrapping the floating islands in a protective, velvety blanket and carrying away the last whispers of the daily harvest. There are no more baskets to carry, no more reed fences to weave, and no more canals to navigate. The world around you is sinking into a deep, peaceful stillness, resting beneath a vast, timeless sky that has watched over the quiet waters and the floating green ribbons of this valley for centuries. Your breathing slows, matching the gentle, rhythmic ripple of the lake against the willow roots, as you let yourself drift away into the soft, warm shadows of a well-earned rest. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into the fog-draped streets and heavy, velvet-lined bedrooms of Victorian London, where the air is thick with the scent of coal smoke, lavender water, and the faint, sweet tang of industrial progress. You are not a wealthy industrialist or a famous consulting detective. Instead, you are a thoroughly exhausted upper-class citizen reclining against a mountain of lace pillows, staring wide awake at the ceiling while your mind races with the anxieties of a fast-paced 19th century world. And honestly, you probably won't survive this shift if you resort to the highly questionable medical elixirs sitting on your nightstand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you are settling in, go ahead and drop a comment below with your current location and your local time. It is always deeply fascinating to see where in the world you are trying to fall asleep right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull your heavy wool blanket up to your chin, listening to the distant, muffled clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the cobblestones below. Mainstream historical analysis notes that the Industrial Revolution completely upended traditional human sleep patterns, introducing gas lighting that stretched the waking day and causing a massive spike in what Victorian doctors diagnosed as neurasthenia, or nervous exhaustion. You are a prime victim of this modern age. Your brain is buzzing with the stock market tickers, the frantic pace of steamship schedules, and the sheer volume of daily newspapers. To cope with this unprecedented sleeplessness, your contemporary doctors haven't suggested meditation or cutting back on afternoon tea. Instead, they have pointed you toward the cutting edge of industrial craftsmanship. Some fringe, alternative medical theories of the 1880s actually suggested that insomnia was caused by an uneven distribution of magnetic fluids in the skull, recommending that patients wear heavy zinc-lined nightcaps or surround their beds with iron filings to realign their internal compasses, which sounds incredibly uncomfortable to sleep in. You look past your bedside candle toward a small, polished mahogany box resting on your table. Inside this box lies a marvel of Swiss engineering, a miniature brass automaton designed specifically to soothe a fractured mind. Historians still argue Whether these hyper-complex mechanical gadgets were genuinely viewed as legitimate clinical sleep aids by the medical establishment, or if they were simply ultra-expensive novelty status symbols for the bored and wealthy. As you reach out a hand from beneath your quilt to unlatch the mahogany box, you don't care about the academic debate. You are just a desperate, sleepy person hoping that a collection of spinning gears can do what your racing brain cannot, providing a steady, predictable rhythm to drown out the chaotic noises of a rapidly modernizing world. You carefully lift the heavy brass key from its velvet groove, your fingers feeling the cold, intricate notches of the metal. Remember that sticky, wild emmer dough we mixed back in ancient Egypt? Or the heavy lake mud we dredged up with the zoquimadel in the Aztec canals? Well, tonight you are handling the absolute pinnacle of 19th century precision manufacturing, where there is zero room for wet, organic messiness. You insert the key into the winding arbor of the brass automaton resting on your bedside table. Click, crank, click. The sound is crisp, metallic, and deeply satisfying as you tighten the internal mainspring, storing up a reservoir of kinetic energy that is about to be released in the most deliberate, measured way possible. Mainstream horological history shows that the Victorian elite became completely obsessed with micromechanics, adapting the intricate gear trains of pocket watches to create miniature automatons that could mimic life with astonishing accuracy. You gently flip the tiny silver start lever on the side of the brass casing. Instantly, a soft, hypnotic whirring fills the quiet bedroom as the governor flywheel begins to spin, regulating the release of the spring's power. Inside the mechanism, dozens of microscopic, hand-filed teeth engage with one another, creating a rhythmic, low-frequency hum that acts like a weighted blanket for your ears. Some fringe alternative psychology papers from the late Victorian era suggested that the precise, repeating frequency of brass gears clicking together could physically realign the microscopic vibrations of the human nervous system, effectively mesmerizing the brain into a state of artificial trance. It certainly feels that way right now. You watch a small, enameled brass figure of a tightrope walker emerge from a hidden trapdoor on top of the box. The figure begins to step forward, balancing with a tiny golden pole, its movements completely dictated by a series of hidden, rotating cams. Historians still argue whether these intricate clockwork devices were an intentional, early attempt at creating a mechanical white noise machine for cognitive behavioral therapy, or if they were just high-end distractions meant to keep rich insomniacs from staring at the wall all night. As you track the steady, unvarying pace of the miniature acrobat, your eyes begin to track the repetitive motion with a heavy, lazy focus. The sheer predictability of the machine is its greatest comfort. Unlike your thoughts, which jump chaotically from one daytime anxiety to the next, the clockwork toy has only one path to take, ticking away with a soothing, unbothered certainty that invites your eyelids to drop just a fraction lower. You let out a long, slow breath, watching the brass acrobat slide back into its mahogany housing with a polite, metallic click. But your night is far from over, and your stubborn Victorian brain is still humming with residual tension. You reach for a second, even more complex device sitting on the mantelpiece, a silver gilt cage containing a life-sized mechanical nightingale. Mainstream medical history shows that 19th century physicians frequently prescribed sensory redirection for insomnia, believing that if a patient could focus on a highly detailed, non-threatening artificial imitation of nature, the brain's overstimulated nervous pathways would naturally cool down. Remember that rich, pungent fertilizer economy we explored in the Aztec floating gardens? Well, the Victorian approach to natural wellness is far more sterile, replacing actual swampy nature with pristine, oil-lubricated gears. You wind the nightingale's key, and with a soft hiss of miniature leather bellows hidden inside the base, the silver bird begins to move. Its head tilts side to side, its tiny beak opens and closes in perfect synchronization, and a beautifully crisp, warbling song floats through the gaslit room. The sound is incredibly complex, produced by a tiny sliding piston that changes the pitch of a miniature whistle inside the bird's chest. Some fringe, alternative medical tracts of the 1870s claimed that these mechanical bird songs were embedded with hidden mathematical sonic frequencies discovered by secret societies, capable of curing everything from chronic sleeplessness to severe gout by vibrating the pineal gland, though in reality, it's just a brilliant arrangement of brass cams and levers. As the mechanical nightingale continues its artificial serenade, you lean back against your pillows, letting the repetitive, rhythmic cadence of the song wash over you. The beauty of the mechanical bird is that it never gets tired, never misses a note, and never varies its routine. Historians still argue whether the extreme Victorian popularity of these natural simulators reflected a deep, collective psychological grief over the loss of the rural countryside due to rapid industrialization, or if people simply preferred a bird that didn't leave a mess on the furniture. To your tired eyes, the silver feathers of the automaton catch the flickering light of the fireplace, creating a shimmering, hypnotic display that slowly draws your attention away from your daytime worries and into a world governed by nothing but the tranquil, unhurried laws of mechanics. You rest your head deeper into your pillow, your gaze drifting from the silver nightingale toward the ornate green patterns styling your bedroom walls. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from the ancient Nile, or the municipal fertilizer barges navigating the canals of Lake Texcoco? Well, the Victorian bedroom features its own incredibly bizarre, hidden environmental hazards that might make you think twice about your interior design choices. Mainstream architectural history reminds us that the iconic, vivid green pigments so beloved in 19th century home decor, often known as Sheely's green, were heavily laced with copper arsenite. As your fireplace heats the room, the damp air can cause toxic fungi to release microscopic arsenic dust into your sleeping space, meaning your desperate quest for a good night's rest is occasionally a battle against your own wallpaper. To counteract the stuffy, occasionally toxic air of a heavy velvet bedroom, your physician has recommended surrounding yourself with steady, air-churning mechanics. Beside your bed, a small clockwork fan whispers with a gentle, metallic whir, 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 its brass blades powered by a heavy internal spring that slowly unwinds over the course of 4 hours. Some fringe, alternative design journals from the late 1800s even promoted the invention of sleep traps, specialized in closed canopy beds equipped with automated clockwork-driven feather dusters and miniature bellows designed to constantly purify the air around the sleeper's face, though most people found the loud ticking of an air purifier right above their ears to be entirely counterproductive to actual slumber. You close your eyes, tuning out the faint patterns on the wall and focusing entirely on the rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat of your clockwork devices. The steady tick, tick, tick of the fan combines with the fading warble of the silver nightingale, creating a layered, multitonal symphony of white noise that blankets the room. Historians still argue whether the extreme Victorian reliance on mechanical sleep aids was a subconscious attempt to harmonize human biology with the relentless, unyielding pulse of the machine age, or if it was simply a manifestation of a culture that believed any human problem could be solved with enough brass gears and a drop of machine oil. As you listen to the mechanical fan gently slicing through the warm air, the sheer, unvarying repetition begins to lull your mind, smoothing out the jagged edges of your thoughts and drawing you down into a heavy, rhythmic state of relaxation. You lie perfectly still in the deep, enveloping darkness of your bedroom, watching the final, lazy rotations of the clockwork fan as its heavy brass mainspring finally approaches the end of its tension. The brilliant green patterns on the arsenic wallpaper have faded into soft, velvety shadows, and the roaring fireplace has quieted down to a gentle, pulsing heap of glowing red embers. Mainstream cultural historians widely recognize this late 19th century obsession with mechanical precision as the direct, foundational precursor to our modern obsession with sleep technology, stretching a fascinating historical line from the hand-filed brass gears of a Victorian automaton straight to the digital white noise machines, sleep tracking rings, and rhythmic smartphone apps we use to soothe our minds today. As you listen to the final, slow tick, tick, tick of the dying mechanism, you are experiencing the exact same psychological relief that weary citizens of the British Empire sought over a century ago. Some fringe historical theorists like to claim that certain vintage Swiss clockwork toys possess a unique acoustic frequency capable of permanently altering human brain waves to eliminate insomnia for good, which has prompted modern sleep researchers to analyze recordings of antique music boxes for hidden therapeutic properties, though standard neurology confirms that any gentle, highly predictable auditory rhythm is naturally effective at lowering our heart rates and calming our overstimulated nervous systems. As you prepare to finally yield to the heavy, comforting pull of deep sleep, you realize that your frantic, modern thoughts have been completely conquered by the slow, unhurried choreography of the machine. Historians still argue whether our modern transition from beautiful, tactile brass mechanics to silent digital screens has made our nights more efficient, or if it has robbed us of a comforting physical connection to the rhythms of the world. For you, drifting away in the quiet safety of this gaslit sanctuary, the debate dissolves into the dark. The brilliant craftsmanship of the past has done its job, transforming the chaotic noise of an industrial century into a beautiful, rhythmic lullaby that carries you effortlessly toward the dawn. The long, exhausting day in the bustling heart of the Victorian city is finally over, and the frantic pace of the modern age is gently dissolving into the cool, still air of the midnight hours. The heavy gear trains sit quiet now. The intricate brass levers rest motionless inside their polished mahogany cases, and the steady whirring of the clockwork fan has softened into a peaceful, total silence. You can let go of the winding keys, leave the anxieties of the marketplace behind, and allow your tired body to completely relax. The gentle, cool fog of the London night whispers against the heavy window panes, wrapping your bedroom in a protective, quiet embrace and carrying away the last traces of coal smoke and daytime tension. There are no more ledger books to balance, no more steamship timetables to check, and no more ticking springs to wind. The world around you is sinking into a deep, velvety slumber, resting beneath a vast, star-filled sky that has watched over weary thinkers, clever inventors, and tired souls for generations. Your breathing slows, matching the deep, steady, and peaceful stillness of the room as you let yourself drift away into the soft, warm shadows of a well-earned rest. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back centuries into the crisp, mist-shrouded mountain air of a high-altitude tea outpost along the ancient Silk Road, where the atmosphere smells beautifully of damp earth, wood smoke, and the intensely fresh floral aroma of thousands of drying tea leaves. You are not a wealthy merchant king or a daring nomadic horse archer. Instead, you are a thoroughly exhausted packing apprentice sitting on a low wooden stool, surrounded by towering bamboo baskets, and honestly, you probably won't survive this shift if you let a single drop of mountain moisture ruin this premium imperial harvest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you are settling in, go ahead and drop a comment below with your current location and your local time. It is always deeply fascinating to see where in the world you are trying to fall asleep right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You run your fingers through a wide, shallow tray of freshly withered Camellia sinensis leaves, listening to the soft, papery rustle they make against the woven split bamboo mesh. Mainstream economic history notes that tea was one of the most valuable, high-density trade commodities along the Trans-Eurasian networks, acting not just as a luxury beverage, but as a literal form of standardized currency used to buy war horses from the northern steppes. You are directly responsible for making sure this currency doesn't turn into a pile of rotten, moldy compost before it even clears the first mountain pass. Your palms are slightly calloused from hours of sorting, and your fingers are stained a deep, herbal green. To keep the delicate loose leaves from blowing away in the erratic mountain drafts, your workshop doesn't use modern airtight plastic bins. Instead, They rely on ancient, highly specific natural materials. Some fringe, alternative theories from early 20th century travelogues actually suggested that ancient tea masters could tune the humidity of a packing room by humming specific, low-frequency throat chants to vibrate the moisture right out of the air, which sounds like an exhausting way to do dehydrating work. You look toward the center of the workshop, where a massive wooden press sits waiting. Historians still argue whether the transition from loose-leaf transport to heavily compressed tea bricks was initially invented to save precious physical space in the saddlebags, or if it was primarily a preservation tactic to lock out the destructive effects of ambient oxygen. As you gather a massive armful of the aromatic leaves, you don't particularly care about the academic debate. You are just a sleepy worker whose muscles are deeply tired, staring at a mountain of green foliage that must be meticulously tamed, shaped, and packed before the caravan bells begin to chime at dawn. You slide your low wooden stool closer to the massive oak beam of the lever press, your boots crunching softly on a few stray brittle stems that have escaped the sorting trays. Remember that hyper-precise, oil-lubricated Swiss clockwork automaton we wound in the velvet-lined Victorian bedroom? Well, tonight your machinery is infinitely more rustic, relying on heavy timber, thick hemp rope, and the slow, agonizing application of pure body weight. Mainstream historical documentation of the ancient tea horse road confirms that loose leaves were first thoroughly withered, then exposed to a precise burst of wood-fired steam to make them supple and sticky before being packed tightly into deeply carved pear wood molds. You take a heavy wooden scoop, loading the steaming, fragrant mass of dark green leaves into the rectangular cavity of the mold. The steam rises up, hitting your face with a rich, vegetal cloud that opens your pores and fills the room with the scent of an ancient forest. To make sure the brick holds its shape across thousands of bumpy miles, you insert a decorative wooden block carved with the official seal of the regional governor. Some fringe, alternative archaeological theories claim that these stamped designs were actually ancient topographical road maps, encoded with secret cartographic lines to help illiterate caravan drivers navigate through hidden Himalayan mountain shortcuts, though in reality, it was just a highly effective corporate trademark to keep rivals from counterfeiting your premium blends. Once the mold is packed to the brim, you grab the heavy leather guide rope, throwing your weight onto the long counterweight beam. Creak, groan, thud. The wooden lever shifts downward, exerting immense hydraulic force on the wet leaves, squeezing out every single microscopic pocket of trapped air. You hold your breath, listening to the rhythmic, slow drip of excess tea juice running down the drainage grooves of the stone base. This compression turns a mountain of fluffy, unmanageable leaves into a rock-solid, incredibly dense slab that is virtually indestructible. Historians still argue whether these tightly compressed bricks were uniformly standardized in weight to function as an immutable, cross-border fiscal currency, or if individual packing guilds altered their brick dimensions wildly to cheat the imperial tax collectors at the border gates. For you, the economic theories take a back seat to the comforting, steady repetition of the labor. Scoop the leaves, steam the mold, pull the lever, let it set. The wood creaks the exact same way every single time, and as you slide the completed rigid brick out of its wooden sleeve, it feels as heavy and solid as a block of slate, perfectly engineered to survive the long, slow journey across the world. You run a tired hand across the sleek, dark face of the freshly molded tea brick, feeling the raised edges of the governor's seal that you just stamped into its surface. It is a solid, handsome thing, but right now, it is also dangerously vulnerable. Remember that thick, toxic copper arsenite wallpaper we worried about in the Victorian bedroom, or the public latrines where the Aztecs systematically harvested municipal fertilizer? Well, out here on the high mountain trade paths, your primary enemy is atmospheric moisture and the devastating rot it brings. Mainstream material culture, studies of the Silk Road, show that once tea bricks were pressed, they had to be immediately wrapped in multiple protective layers, starting with inner linings of charcoal-dusted, handmade paper to absorb residual humidity, followed by structural, outer casings of split bamboo matting woven into incredibly tight, breathable jackets. You pick up a sheet of thick, fibrous mulberry paper, sprinkling a fine dusting of ground wood charcoal across its surface before wrapping it tightly around the warm tea brick. The charcoal acts as a silent, molecular shield, ready to trap any stray droplets of moisture before they can penetrate the leaves. Next, you reach for a bundle of long, flexible bamboo strips that have been boiled to prevent them from snapping. Your fingers work in a swift, repeating pattern, interlacing the split cane over the paper package to create a rigid, protective cage. Some fringe, alternative botanical folklore from the region suggests that if the bamboo used for wrapping was harvested during a specific phase of the lunar eclipse, its fibers would naturally repel mountain insects and predatory beetles through a kind of spiritual force field, though any experienced merchant will tell you that the beetles are mostly deterred by the bitter, smoky oils infused into the bindings during the drying process. Once the bamboo jackets are secured, the most rugged phase of the packing begins, enclosing the bundles in thick, raw animal hides. You pull a heavy, slightly pungent sheet of cured yak leather across your workbench, using a thick bone needle and heavy sinew thread to stitch the hide directly over the bamboo-cased tea. As you pull the stitches taut, the smell of grease and leather mixes with the herbal perfume of the tea, creating an aroma that defines the caravan lifestyle. Historians still argue whether these heavy animal hide outer wrappers were universally required by imperial trade edicts to standardize cargo dimensions for border customs, or if they were simply a grassroots, survivalist innovation perfected by the caravan drivers themselves to keep their cargo bone dry when crossing freezing, rain-swept rivers. For you, the legal details matter much less than the physical security of the knot. You tie off the thick sinew cord with a heavy double hitch, patting the leather bundle with satisfaction. It is a completely airtight, shock-proof capsule of flavor, perfectly shielded from the harsh world outside, and ready to be stacked into the heavy wooden panniers that will soon swing from the sides of an impatient pack animal. You lift the heavy leather-wrapped bundle of tea bricks from your workbench and step out of the packing workshop into the cool, pre-dawn air of the caravan courtyard. Remember that heavy, narrow dugout canoe we balanced so carefully in the Aztec canals to transport fresh produce to market? Tonight, you are dealing with a completely different kind of transport, where your cargo must survive months of treacherous clambering over jagged rocks rather than a smooth glide across water. Mainstream transportation history records that a single pack animal along the southwestern Silk Road could carry up to several hundred pounds of tightly packed tea, balanced perfectly on custom-made wooden pack saddles designed to distribute the immense weight evenly across the animal's spine. The courtyard is alive with a slow, sleepy energy as the caravan drivers prepare for departure. You walk over to a large, shaggy pack mule, its breath billowing in pale white clouds in the frosty morning air. You carefully slide your wrapped tea bundles into the deep pockets of a reinforced wicker pannier, ensuring that the weight matches the bundle on the opposite side precisely. If the load is unbalanced by even a few ounces, the saddle will shift during a steep climb, risking a disastrous fall down a rocky cliffside. Some fringe, alternative history enthusiasts love to speculate that the rhythmic, jingling cadence of the bronze bells attached to the lead animal's collars wasn't just for locating stray mules in the mountain fog, but was actually a complex acoustic navigation code that resonated with the frequency of the surrounding rock formations to predict earthquakes, though anyone who has ever navigated a mountain trail knows the bells are just a vital safety feature to keep the team together in the dark. You pull a thick hemp rope tight across the wicker frame, securing the pannier with a series of heavy knots. The wind howling off the high mountain passes carries the scent of distant snow and pine forests, reminding you of the thousands of miles that lie ahead for these leaves. Historians still argue whether the route's high-altitude toll stations were operated as a tightly controlled state monopoly to fund imperial armies, or if local mountain tribes independently managed the trail passes through an informal system of protection fees and mutual trade pacts. As you check the tension of the ropes one last time, you listen to the rhythmic, comforting clatter of hooves on stone and the soft creaking of leather saddles, knowing that your meticulous packing job is the only thing standing between this precious imperial harvest and the unforgiving elements of the long trail ahead. You stand at the edge of the mountain outpost, watching the tail end of the long caravan slowly disappear into the swirling morning mist, the faint, rhythmic chime of the bronze pack bells gradually fading into the vast silence of the peaks. Your hands are finally empty, resting comfortably in your wide wool sleeves, and your work for the great trade season is finally complete. Mainstream food science and culinary history note that this extraordinarily long, grueling journey across fluctuating climates was not just a logistical hurdle, but a transformative culinary process. The constant shifts in humidity and temperature inside the leather-wrapped bundles caused the compressed leaves to undergo a slow, accidental post-fermentation, effectively inventing dark, pure tea and altering the flavor profile into something rich, smooth, and deeply prized across the globe. As you walk back toward the quiet warmth of the empty workshop, you look at the scattered bamboo shavings and mulberry paper scraps coating the floor. Some fringe historical theorists like to suggest that the specific microscopic fungi responsible for aging the tea along the Silk Roads were ancient, extraterrestrial cultures introduced to the high plateaus by meteor impacts, which supposedly granted the beverage mystical longevity-boosting properties, though standard microbiology confirms that the fermentation was entirely driven by completely natural, airborne microbes that thrived inside the warm, breathable bamboo wrappers during the sweaty desert stretches of the trek. You find yourself staying at one final, loose brick that was kept behind for the workshop staff. Historians still argue whether the complex, evolving flavor notes of Silk Road tea were intentionally sought after by ancient master blenders who secretly engineered the packing techniques to foster fermentation, or if the global crave for aged tea was just a happy, historical accident born from the sheer length of the journey. For you, turning over the smooth, pressed brick in your hands, the modern analysis matters very little. The morning sun is finally breaking through the heavy mountain clouds, casting a warm, golden glow across your workbench, and the knowledge that your meticulous packing will keep the harvest safe, aging beautifully in the dark until it reaches the distant palaces of the West, brings a profound sense of quiet accomplishment to the end of your long shift. The long, slow morning of the caravan departure is finally drawing to a close, and the crisp, invigorating air of the high mountain trails is gently softening into a warm, comforting afternoon quiet. The bustling workshops sit silent now. The heavy wooden lever presses are locked safely in place, and the distant clatter of pack animal hooves has dissolved into a peaceful, total stillness across the valley. You can let go of the thick hemp ropes, leave the fragrant mountains of sorted leaves behind, and allow your tired body to completely unwind. The cool, soft mist of the high plateaus rises gently from the pine forests, wrapping the mountain outpost in a protective, quiet blanket and carrying away the last aromas of steam and fresh leather. There are no more bamboo strips to weave, no more leather hides to stitch, and no more heavy wooden molds to press. The world around you is sinking into a deep, velvety slumber, resting beneath a vast, timeless sky that has watched over the ancient paths, the weary travelers, and the quiet, fragrant treasures of this valley for centuries. Your breathing slows, matching the deep, steady, and peaceful rhythm of the mountain wind as you let yourself drift away into the soft, warm shadows of a well-earned rest. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into the sun-drenched, golden mythic valleys of ancient Greece, where the afternoon air is thick with the scent of wild thyme, warm earth, and the incredibly dry, sweet perfume of an endless, unharvested field of grain. You are not a heroic demigod on an epic quest or a legendary warrior battling mythical beasts. Instead, you are a completely exhausted mortal farmhand standing knee-deep in a vast ocean of wheat. And honestly, you probably won't survive this shift if you lose track of the precise geometric filing system that a restless Olympian deity has decided to implement today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you are settling in, go ahead and drop a comment below with your current location and your local time. It is always deeply fascinating to see where in the world you are trying to fall asleep right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shield your eyes from the warm Mediterranean sun, looking out over a rolling plain where the grain stretches all the way to the horizon. Mainstream classical history notes that Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, was central to the survival of ancient Greek civilization, governing the vital seasonal cycles that allowed communities to transition from nomadic foraging to stable, settled agricultural societies. Today, however, she isn't interested in grand seasonal shifts. She is in a mood of intense, hyper-focused micromanagement. Your sandals sink slightly into the soft, warm dust as you watch her glide through the stalks, her divine brow furrowed at the absolute, disorganized chaos of nature. The leaves are rustling in a gentle, warm breeze, creating a soft, static hiss that fills the quiet landscape. To bring order to this sprawling valley, Demeter isn't using a divine sickle or a massive storm cloud. She is using her bare hands to examine every single stalk. Some fringe, alternative mythological interpretations from obscure late antique cults actually suggested that the goddess possessed a secret, numeric agricultural code, an ancient precursor to the Fibonacci sequence, and that she believed a field could only achieve true spiritual immortality if the total number of grain kernels on every single stalk was an absolute prime number, which sounds like an incredibly tedious math problem to solve under a hot sun. You look down at a small patch of barley near your feet, realizing the sheer scale of the task ahead. Historians still argue whether these specific, lesser-known myths about Demeter's hyper-obsessive organizational phases were symbolic representations of early Greek attempts to categorize different botanical species, or if they were just ancient comedic parables meant to tease the overly bureaucratic nature of the priesthood. As you bend down to touch a slender, nodding head of wheat, you don't care about the academic debate. You are just a sleepy helper whose back is already tired, watching a goddess decide that every single blade of grain must be evaluated, categorized, and filed by hand before the sun dips below the western mountains. You reach out your hand, your fingers gently smoothing over a rough, bristly head of emmer wheat that is leaning slightly to the left. Remember that rock-solid, leather-wrapped block of tea bricks we meticulously stitched together along the freezing, mist-shrouded mountain passes of the Silk Road? Well, today, your materials are infinitely more delicate, and instead of protecting a cargo of compressed leaves from mountain moisture, you are trying to satisfy an Olympian goddess who treats a sprawling agricultural valley like a hyper-organized library. Mainstream archaeobotanical history notes that ancient Greek agriculture relied heavily on three primary cereal crops: barley, emmer, and durum wheat, which had to be carefully cultivated in the thin, rocky Mediterranean soil to prevent a widespread famine. Demeter, however, has taken this cultivation to a bafflingly precise extreme. She motions for you to step forward, holding up a polished bronze measuring rod that has been etched with microscopic units of measurement. Your job is to help her catalog the physical stature of every single plant in this particular row. You slide your fingers up a slender stalk, measuring its exact height from the root flare to the tip of its bearded awn. The stalk sways gently under your touch, releasing a soft, dry rustle that blends into the sleepy, hypnotic hum of the surrounding field. Some fringe, alternative fringe science pamphlets published in the 19th century actually claimed that ancient agricultural deities were capable of altering the gravitational pull around individual plant roots, allowing them to grow at a perfectly uniform 90-degree angle to the Earth's crust to maximize solar efficiency, though in reality, any farmer will tell you that plants just awkwardly lean toward whatever sunlight they can catch. With the bronze rod in hand, you systematically categorize the stalks into groups based on their specific golden hue. There is pale amber, deep flaxen, and a rich, honeyed ochre that catches the afternoon light like polished metal. Historians still argue whether the complex, color-coded agricultural rituals described in early Hellenic hymns were actual, sophisticated methods for tracking the ripeness of communal crops, or if they were merely poetic exaggerations meant to emphasize the aesthetic beauty of the goddess's domain. As you match another nodding blade of wheat to the precise notch on the bronze rod, the sheer, unvarying repetition of the task begins to heavy your movements. The field stretches out endlessly, an infinite sea of green and gold, but under Demeter's watchful, tranquil gaze, each measurement becomes a slow, rhythmic meditation, transforming the overwhelming chaos of nature into a quiet, perfectly predictable grid of divine order. You lower your measuring rod for a moment, gently wiping a bead of sweat from your forehead as you look down at the warm, dark soil between the neat rows of grain. Remember that charcoal-dusted mulberry paper we wrapped so carefully around the tea bricks to protect them from rot? Out here in Demeter's mythic fields, the preservation process is happening live, right in the earth, and your main task is filtering out anything that disrupts the perfect mathematical harmony of the harvest. Mainstream classical studies show that weeds like wild oats and invasive darnel, often referred to in ancient texts as the infamous tare, were the bane of Greek agriculture, capable of ruining entire fields if not painstakingly weeded out by hand during the early stages of growth. Demeter gestures toward a patch of soil where a tiny, rogue dandelion has dared to sprout between two perfectly aligned stalks of durum wheat. You kneel in the warm dirt, carefully working your fingers around the weed's base to extract its long taproot without disturbing the surrounding grain. As you pull it free, a soft, earthy aroma floats up into the sleepy afternoon air. To make things even more meticulous, you have to keep a watchful eye out for the tiny, industrious field mice that call these golden furrows home. Some fringe, alternative mythological folklore from the late Byzantine era claimed that Demeter didn't actually dislike these small rodents. Instead, she allegedly viewed them as divine accountants, believing their rhythmic burrowing patterns could be deciphered to predict the exact price of grain in the markets of Athens, though any practical farmer knows they are just looking for an easy, starchy snack. You gently nudge a stray mouse away from a low-hanging ear of barley, watching it scurry into the unorganized section of the field. Historians still argue whether the extreme emphasis on pristine, weed-free purity in Demeter's sacred cults was a reflection of early public health concerns regarding toxic ergots and parasitic fungi, or if it was entirely a spiritual concept meant to separate the divine, ordered world of the Olympians from the chaotic wildness of untamed nature. For you, kneeling in the quiet, sun-baked earth, the theological debate fades into the background. The repetitive motion of clearing the soil, sorting the stray seeds, and smoothing down the dirt creates a comforting, rhythmic cadence that slows your breathing, matching the gentle, hypnotic sigh of the wind through the flawless rows of wheat. You shift your weight on the dry ground, moving down the row as Demeter turns her intense, analytical gaze toward the composition of the soil itself. Remember that thick yak leather we stretched tightly over the bamboo tea bundles to seal out the elements, or the precise hand-filed brass gears that whirred so smoothly inside the Victorian automaton? Today, your engineering medium is the very earth beneath your fingernails, and the goddess wants every handful of dirt to possess the exact same ratio of moisture, loam, and mineral richness. Mainstream agricultural historians emphasize that ancient Greek farmers faced an uphill battle against the natural topography of the Aegean, utilizing sophisticated crop rotation, terracing, and carefully managed organic fertilizers to enrich the thin, easily depleted soils of their rocky hillsides. You take a small wooden trowel, gently aerating a patch of rich, dark earth at the base of a towering wheat stalk. The soil crumbles softly under your tool, releasing a deep, cool scent that contrasts beautifully with the warm, baked fragrance of the straw above. To achieve the absolute peak of divine symmetry, Demeter insists that the nutrient distribution must be completely uniform across the entire grid. Some fringe, alternative archaeological pamphlets from the mid-20th century actually proposed that ancient mystery cults used specialized, polished crystal lenses to align solar radiation with the soil's magnetic lines, creating localized pockets of hypercharged earth that forced the grain to sprout at an accelerated, uniform speed, though standard soil science confirms that standard mulching and regular watering are doing all the heavy lifting here. You use your palms to smooth out the topsoil, patting it into a perfectly level, velvety terrace that rings the base of the plant. Historians still argue whether the extreme, meticulous soil management techniques detailed in Hesiod's classic agrarian poetry were meant as practical, literal instructions for contemporary laborers, or if they functioned as a philosophical allegory for cultivating moral discipline and order within the early Greek city-state. As you pat down the final handful of earth in your designated section, the absolute predictability of the motion settles over your mind. The sun is beginning its long, slow descent toward the sea, painting the edges of the mountains in soft shades of lavender and violet and the quiet, repeating hum of your trowel slicing through the loose earth acts as a rhythmic lullaby, easing the tension from your shoulders and drawing your thoughts into a state of deep, tranquil relaxation. You stand up slowly, letting your wooden trowel rest against your hip as you take a long, deep breath of the cooling evening air. Remember that ancient caravan we watched disappear into the high mountain mist of the Silk Road, leaving behind an empty, silent workshop? Here, in this sacred valley, the overwhelming sea of wild, unruly grain has undergone an equally profound transformation under your hands. Through hours of unhurried, meticulous labor, the chaotic wilderness has been tamed into an absolute masterpiece of divine geometry, where every single blade of wheat stands at a flawless, identical angle, perfectly spaced and mirroring its neighbor with majestic precision. Mainstream classical literature notes that this absolute, unyielding control over the landscape was the ultimate expression of Demeter's power, signifying the victory of divine civilization over the raw, unpredictable forces of the wild. As you look out across the valley, the setting sun casts long, perfectly straight shadows down the pristine corridors of gold, creating a hypnotic, shimmering grid that seems to stretch into infinity. Some fringe historical theorists from the early internet era love to suggest that the immense geometric perfection of these mythic harvest fields was actually intended to serve as a massive, organic landing pad for celestial voyagers traveling across the stars, which supposedly explains why certain ancient Greek temples align so precisely with major star constellations, though standard archaeology confirms that the alignment of agricultural fields was entirely based on maximizing the natural flow of seasonal rivers and local sunlight. You look down at the final row of grain, watching the last few stray stalks slide into perfect alignment under the gentle, calming touch of the goddess's fingers. Historians still argue whether the extreme sense of peace and security associated with Demeter's mysteries was born from a psychological relief over securing a stable food supply for the winter, or if the meticulous ordering of the natural world provided a deeper spiritual comfort to a society constantly facing the chaotic realities of war and disease. For you, resting your eyes on the flawless, symmetrical blanket of gold, the academic questions melt away into the twilight. The great work is done. The landscape has achieved absolute, tranquil perfection, and the rhythmic, silent harmony of the ordered earth brings a profound, overwhelming sense of calm to the end of your long day. The long, sun-drenched day in the mythic valleys of ancient Greece is finally drawing to a close, and the intense, warm light of the afternoon is gently dissolving into the cool, still air of the twilight hours. The vast, golden fields sit perfectly quiet now. The bronze measuring rods rest motionless beside the neat furrows, and the soft rustling of the organized wheat has softened into a peaceful, total silence across the plain. You can let go of your wooden trowel, leave the anxieties of the farmstead behind, and allow your tired body to completely relax. The gentle, lavender fog of the Mediterranean night rises slowly from the distant shoreline, wrapping the sacred valley in a protective, quiet embrace, and carrying away the last traces of heat and daytime tension. There are no more stalks to measure, no more weeds to clear, and no more rows of earth to smooth. The world around you is sinking into a deep, velvety slumber, resting beneath a vast, star-filled sky that has watched over weary laborers, powerful deities, and quiet, golden harvests for generations. Your breathing slows, matching the deep, steady, and peaceful rhythm of the evening breeze as you let yourself drift away into the soft, warm shadows of a well-earned rest.